card. This is actually week 6 of the Novel Bootcamp for Script Camp. This is our 12-week course to take you from idea to finished draft of your book in 12 weeks. We are now halfway through, so we've got 6 weeks to go, and you are 1 week away from actually starting pages. So from that point, you're going to have to write about 10,000 words a week in order to keep up with the deadlines and to try to finish in a reasonable amount of time, assuming that you're aiming for a book that's about 70 or 80,000 words at the max, which is what I recommend for a bootcamp style format. So Script Camp is not this class. WordCamp is part of Skill Camp. Skill Camp being our company that hosts many different classes and many events and workshops that help you learn new skills. Script Camp was our first one. WordCamp, this one is our second one, so we're still growing, still adding new stuff all the time. Creator Camp, Film Camp, Tune Camp, all coming up soon. Or all coming with new events and classes soon. These are going to be hosted on those Discord servers, so make sure to stop by and join those if you have interest in those topics. We have a bunch of recurring ongoing events, like we have Animation Lab, which is Tuesday nights on Tune Camp, and that one is going to be sort of like a boot camp course that runs for about the same amount of time as this one here. We also have things recurring like Horror Workshop on Tuesdays, which is a group. You can start your own group if you're interested in a specific genre or topic and just want to be there to host the weekly meetings for it. Amanda's Fantasy Group meets tomorrow, Sundays at 5. We have Pilot Bootcamp that just started a week ago, so not too late to join that if you have interest in writing a pilot. Script Analysis Bootcamp is Thursdays. We have Feature Bootcamp, that's Fridays from 6 to 8. And Novel Bootcamp, this one is 12 to 2 on Saturdays for the rest of the year. We also will have the lab later today, so if you have questions or want to get more individual work done on something specific, then lab from 4 to 6 is the best place to go. You can also refer your friends. Make sure to let me or Nacho know if you have friends that you want to refer. They get a free month of Script Camp, and then if they continue, you will also get a free month as well. And you both get a free month of Arc Studio Pro, which is a great screenwriting software. So, we are on week 6 today. So the goal is the idea is that we're working on scene cards. Sorry, I used the wrong slide here, so the wrong thing's highlighted. Week 6 should be highlighted. This is the intention here is to give you this extra week to figure out what happens in every scene in your book, with the intention of front-loading that work and making sure that we are establishing that very comprehensive roadmap for the story before we begin. With only 2 weeks to work on this, I mean, you can work on this section, the scene card section of a novel, for weeks to months. Some people spend years on this, so you can see how this is a rapid and somewhat accelerated version of how most people kind of usually approach this, but that's okay. Just try your very best, and you will learn more by writing a bad book and finishing it than you would by never finishing a book that you are working on. So it's okay if it turns out bad. Give yourself permission to mess it up or to do a not great job. A first draft also just does not have to be perfect. So try your very best, and this week we want to look at those scene cards and try to fix those gaps, get you unstuck, and just get you on the right track. This class is going to be focused on plotting and on examining those issues in the scene cards. And we're going to talk a little about just how do you present and discuss your story as well, because in order to diagnose issues in the story, you have to tell us what the story is. And it's helpful if you're able to give a much more truncated version of it as you talk through what the major plot events are. So I'm going to be giving an example today from my most recent book that I'm querying now, where I'll just sort of like take you through the story by reading the synopsis. You don't have to have a synopsis ready to go and written in order to start a book, but at some point you will have to write one, which is basically a 2-page double-spaced summary of everything that happens. So you really have to learn what to leave out and what to skip over and how to effectively and efficiently get through all that information in such a way that that your audience is fully on board and fully understands. So let's start with our check-ins, though, in which we're going to ask, how is progress on your scene cards going, and maybe just anything you're reading lately that you want to tell us about. We can then, I'll discuss taking us through the story, and I'll just give you this example of, I'll just, spend 5 minutes just taking you through the story of my most recent book and encourage you to try to do the same. It's okay if you don't have the entire thing worked out, but just to the best of your ability, try to take us through what you have. And we're going to try to get you unstuck, fix the problems, and just make sure that you are full steam ahead to start pages, or to finish out this outline and to start pages by next week. And maybe even in the process, be able to zero in on a theme or a coherent dramatic argument. So this might be a good place to sort of figure out where the story is going and why it's going there. Okay, so let's start with check-ins, though, so you can tell us how was your progress recently, what did you read, what did you notice or learn from those things, and any other updates that you want to give us. We'll start with Amanda. Hope you're feeling better, Amanda.
Yeah, I'm almost back to normal. So yeah, I haven't made a whole lot of progress, but I've been working every day, but I haven't, had the mind space to dive into it too much, like do major brainstorming. So I've finished Keys to the Kingdom. I definitely like Frog Kisser better. That's just more my style. And I just watched that video that you posted. Stop describing so much. And that was really helpful because now I kind of understand why I like certain writers too. And I kind of like, and just like he was saying with the Sanderson author, I don't know if I've read much of him, but the way that he was saying, like, you can be prolific and have great stories, but just not be that good at description. And it's sort of like, it's just when those things all come together, that's what just makes the book sort of shine. But you can still be successful even if aren't strong in one area. Yeah, that was a really cool video.
Yeah, highly recommend the other one too. They go really well.
Yeah,
like the one
I started that one, but and then I started another book called Stealing Magic. I literally just read the opening chapter, the catalyst, basically. It seems to begin very quickly. And it's fun. So far, it's really fun, and it feels really original, which I like. Like when I opened up like the Prydain, Lloyd Alexander, it's very middle grade. It's not middle grade, also adults. And it's very middle grade. But it, like when I read it, it felt so derivative of Lord of the Rings, like just so obviously derivative that I almost couldn't get through it because it was like a watered down version. So it's almost like you're better off just kind of, anyways.
In the 60s and 70s especially, the fantasy market was such that a lot of books were kind of had to be Tolkien clones in order to get published, so that during that era, you'll notice like a lot, especially in like early Wheel of Time, is much more just like, okay, we're just doing more Lord of the Rings, but over time, I think that the genre was finding its feet, and the publishing marketplace was kind of figuring out what to do with it still. So in that time, you would find a lot of Tolkien clones because they were
and if I was a kid and I read it, I would have loved it too. I mean, it was middle grade, so there's a reason why it's called middle grade and not adult, right? It was, and so if I had read that, you'd read it younger than you'd read Lord of the Rings, anyways. So yeah, it would be perfect for that age. I just didn't read it as a kid, so.
Right.
But I've read books like it that had the similar problems. For me as an adult reading it, that I loved as a kid. So there's a time and a place for all types of, but that's really good context as well. Like even the way that they name, but it's like when it's a throwback to Lord of the Rings, you got to be really careful because if someone compares it, right, then you're kind of screwed, right? Unless you're doing really good. And
some people just really like what they like, so it's not like a death sentence necessarily. Sometimes readers don't want things that are crazy, new, and different, which I guess that was the thinking behind why publishers were like, no, we just need more of what we know works, because they don't really know what would be the next thing. Where do we take this from here? Basically, they were like, we don't know.
Right.
So
right.
That happens to a lot of genres as they kind of find their feet.
Yeah. I guess, it just depends, I guess, for me, it doesn't work. And sometimes I'll, and if the author does it sneakily enough, I won't notice it, right? And then I'll be like, Like Frogkister was very classic castle stuff,
Yeah.
but it was cute and I was welcome.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, this is just interesting. Um, someone opening scene, someone comes into a girl's garden while she's sleeping, half awake, and steals magic from her garden and goes back into another world. That's all we know. And like it's a very interesting beginning. You've got me.
Hmm.
Like that's interesting, just a mortal. Some hears some voices, barely opens her eye. It just yeah, it's pretty cool. Um and um so then I also mapped, so I started mapping out um fantasy books across the Save the Cat, just breaking apart a lot of stories,
Hmm.
to see where their midpoints are, where their olives lost are, and then I started mapping out my plot on the timeline thing, in the timeline version of things to see where things, so you literally can see it in one image, to
Hmm.
see your whole plot in one image, and that's where I've started. I mapped it out in that way, and I now I have a few blanks that I'm working on. So that's where I'm at right now. But
Okay. What
uh,
percent done with the scene cards would you say that you are?
oh, I'm still outlining.
Oh, still on story beats.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, that's all right. We can hopefully fix that up today and fill in those last couple holes.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there are things though I do feel the like I'm starting to understand what the book is about. And so I'm okay going slower because if something like if I like I'm at this point I'm like, "Oh, what if the underground represents like all the things that the castle threw down below?" Like what if it's like and then there's almost not a formula, but I'm like, "Oh, okay, so she discovers, three levels of things
Mm-hmm.
that the kingdom is hidden. Like then I'm like one, two, three. Like it's just so there might be some things are shifting, and I'm okay with that right now. And I don't feel like there are times where I felt like, oh, I'm just delaying. I'm just trying to perfect something and putting things off. But right now I'm like, if something's not working, then something's not working kind of for a reason. And so yeah, so this is and my biggest this is just an aside kind of for you, and just my biggest thing really is storytelling. Like my writing of course could be way improved and all kinds of stuff, but getting the storytelling structure and really having a complete story almost like fall out of you where you're like, "Oh my God, I have the beginning, the middle, the low point, the high point, the end," and it's just there. That is something I need to really practice. So again, if I wind up with scene cards at the end of this, I'm like, that's a huge, huge victory for me because I still need to work on story.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, and then I am practicing writing. I'm writing little snippets. I'm doing the writing exercises. So I feel like I am sharpening my actual typing writing skills.
Mm-hmm.
But I also know that writing a bunch of scenes when I don't have the story worked out isn't going to be super productive. So
Right.
that's where I'm at. So go ahead and move on. But
Okay. Yeah, sounds like some good progress there, and good. At least if you're not exactly at the milestones to be doing other stuff too, like exercises or reading on your own, all super important.
yeah, yeah.
Thanks, Amanda. Let's check with Carmen.
Hey everyone. I read Inside Man and I'm starting to read it again. A lot of things I've been taking notes. I was taking a lady home. She's from the Middle East, and she was telling me that when she was in Saudi Arabia, she knew this priest who fasted and prayed for like 3 days to expel a demon out of a woman. And she specifically said that the priest told her that this demon was in charge of keeping the lady from having like relationships with other people and wanted to keep her like bound. and alone all her life. And she said that he said that the demon would say, she's mine, nobody else can have her. And then when I came home, I was reading Inside Man, and it's here on page 23. It says, I once spent 11 years in the mind of a poor widow who sold cabbages who sold cabbages out back of the Poverty and Justice at the Hippodrome end of Brook Street just before the war. She was nobody's wife, nobody's daughter. When he says, I once spent 11 years, it's the devil talking. Okay. She was nobody's wife, nobody's daughter, nobody's mother, nobody's reliable tenant or valued employee. Nobody would ever miss her. It goes on and on, really, really kind of matching what the lady was telling me. And then yesterday, it says here, 11 years, and she never once suspected I was there. And yesterday, I met this lady who, she's fit that description too. She's lives in a really like awful place. She's a widow, she's old, and very, she was talking about Jesus in the Bible a lot, and then she was shockingly to me, I mean, my husband is like, why are you even surprised? She was really, I guess this lady really believes she's, maybe, well, I don't know, but she was talking about Jesus and the Bible and everything, and then she was rejoicing about what happened to Pelosi's husband. And I thought, no, this woman, no. Well, she was actually the first one. I had two like that yesterday. And they actually were glad. One of them, she, and it's funny too, because the second one gave me a book on prayer, and she was like, come to our Bible study. And then I told her, I said, yeah, there was this, I was kind of testing to see where's her mind at, because I keep coming across these people that, they talk about Jesus, they talk about the Bible, and then they turn around and say, I wish Biden was dead. The one lady was like, she wished that it had been Pelosi and not the husband. I spent practically all day crying about this, about what happened to Pelosi's husband. And it was just like, wow, I cannot believe that this is going on, And so anyways, my point is I'm finding a lot of truth in these writings. And I mean, I've been making a list and writing down the page numbers and stuff. And it's a book that I would recommend to people actually for certain things. And so I'm going to start reading it again. Cool. Well, I did actually already. Yeah, because there's so much to unpack. Yeah. There's so much there, I mean, I could go on.
So, yeah, I'm excited to read that because I like the first one and is one of my favorite authors. So I'm glad you like KJ Parker as much as I do.
Yeah, I'm going to read all the books.
Yeah, he's got a bunch. And so how's progress on your book, though? Like on your...
Sorry, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to stop writing so that I can do the scene cards, because I've been referring to them. I'm 27% into the actual writing, but just before you were saying that... What were you saying? About doing the scene cards?
Yeah, so you've been writing without having any? You sort of just dived into it based on story beats, or how were you approaching it?
I am following the story beats that we already talked about, remember? And I've gone through and kind of fleshed a lot of things out. There's been some things that have come up in the story, like now there's a drone that's following him around, and it's because they're trying. Okay, so what happened was he healed miraculously, and when they took the bandages off of him, they saw that he had healed and didn't have any traces of being burned all over his body, right? So he's kind of like now sneaking out at night, and he wants to die. He doesn't see that the world is worth saving. He's really, very cynical, and would rather die than live in the world that he lives in. So he's hanging off a bridge right now.
Okay. And so you're going back and you're trying to make the story beats into more distinct scene cards before continuing further. Is that right?
That's what I want to do, so I don't end up getting lost.
Right. Yeah, that's what I would recommend. If you're making great progress without them, then maybe, and if the book turns out awesome without them, then clearly you don't need them. But if you're finding that you are going way off track or getting lost or not knowing what to do next, or the moments just aren't working in the way that they feel like they should be, then having a really coherent and really detailed, thorough set of scene cards is probably the best thing to do.
I think, just like with the scripts, I'd rather have the scene cards than not have them.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I go off and if something different happens, at least I'll have my plan.
Right. Yeah, you can always just disregard them. If you get there, it's better to need them and not have them, and then the opposite. Okay, well, thanks for the update, Carmen. We'll have enough time for both of you guys today to take us through your story and to try to maybe nail down what those scene cards are going to be a little bit better today. And if it turns out that you are not quite prepared to do that, then maybe we can just work on a section that you're struggling with or some obstacle that you are clashing against and just try to make sure that we use the class time as effectively as possible, because I think we're at the stage where everyone knows what to do, and everyone knows the structure, and everyone knows, we've done 5 weeks of this. We've had a fair amount of prep time, so it's now just going to get down to the nitty-gritty work, and today we'll try to just fix as many of those early problems as we can to make sure that the pages are just as smooth and seamless as possible. Nacho, how about you? Are you still with us, Nacho?
Yeah, sorry, I was in the middle of uploading something and I couldn't click the button. So I'm still on the story beat, so I haven't started the scene cards. I think my next step would be to kind of break the story beats down into like sort of bullet lists for, each chapter, and sort of like maybe even the scenes or, what's happening in each chapter, I guess. So I haven't got that far yet.
Okay, so how in terms of percentage, how far would you say that you are into it?
Exactly where I was last week.
Okay. So go ahead.
So I've got kind of a really rough story beats, like a very high level, right? So I haven't kind of figured out what are all the scenes, but it's kind of sifting through my draft, right? So this is like a rewrite project. And I have a lot of scenes. I think some of them, a lot of them will still work. I think the scope of this draft is going to be more narrow and more, it's going to make sense. I think I have kind of like the outside parameters of like where, in the previous draft, it's sort of like I just kept going because I was, it's like NaNoWriMo writing. I was like, okay, I got to finish this by the end of the month. And I was just like going, and especially like the last few chapters, I think there's a lot of placeholders and stuff. And, and I kind of sort of, the epilogue kept going, and so it's like, 80,000 words, but maybe like, good 10 to 15,000 is probably belongs in the sequel, not rather than in this novel.
I see. Okay, so yeah, that is something that we see sometimes in people's first couple books. They'll just kind of keep going until they feel like, okay, I guess stop. I guess it's over.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds good, because a book doesn't have the same like time slot as a movie. We know a movie's going to be 90 minutes to 120 minutes basically, but a book can be a book can go on and on and on, or be split into multiple volumes. or all number of things. So it's hard to tell like what you're aiming for and like how to stick the landing unless you have done it a couple times and plotted a couple stories of this length and then executed it, because then you just come to realize what is working and what's not, like where are these things going to be best placed. So it's good that you have written a version of this, though, because then hopefully you've seen where a lot of those pitfalls are. Do you feel that you've at least mapped out where a lot of the problems will be?
Yeah, it was super helpful going through it together. I think during the writer's lab kind of helped me. And yeah, it was extremely helpful. So I think I know what I need to do next. It's just kind of like, I guess adding a little bit more detail and going through again another iteration with a little bit more detail until I get to where, I'm going to try to not go back to the draft until I have a really clear sense of like, okay, what's happening each chapter, and at least most of the scenes, like a clear, I don't know. I mean, I guess I think in the scene cards that we looked at for Sky Knight, it's kind of like it was broken down more by chapter, sort of, right? Rather than by scene. So, yeah.
I don't usually just draw box like in presenting to the class. I even like drew boxes around the scenes to show where they would be, because normally I don't do that. But in my mind, at least, they are like by paragraph, but paragraph by paragraph. Usually, it's going to be like a paragraph or two per scene. And then I like to mark out the chapters too. But if that gets in the way of your writing, you definitely don't have to do that. Something I would recommend, though, is try to have your catalyst kick in before the end of chapter 3 in a really big way, because usually when you're submitting to literary agents, then they want the first 3 chapters. So if you have any considerations to chapters at all, then make that third one end with something really hooky.
Okay. That's going to be a little tough to do everything I wanted to do in this sort of primitive village that, and then everybody's dead by the third chapter, but I think it's a good thing to aim for.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be it doesn't always have to be the main catalyst of your book, but if you can end chapter 3 with something that invites us to stay and makes us want to keep reading, then it's just the best way to query, essentially, like, because if that's what they're reading to, and you want to end that with something that makes them want to request the full version. So obviously,
awesome.
every chapter should.
Could you argue that like putting it all in the exciting cliffhanger in chapter 3 is kind of like how you throw all the good stuff in the pilot? It's like, it's not that it can't change later too, right? Sure. It's not like you can't, but you're just trying to put your best foot forward,
right?
And so yeah.
Yeah, so we very infrequently will they request the full manuscript. It's only if they're really, really, really into the first 3 chapters. So you're incentivized very strongly to really draw us in. Obviously, the first chapter should really draw us in. The second chapter should continue what you already started. Everything needs to draw us in. But if you're looking for a spot where I'm going to put that like really great hook or that great catalyst or some really cool, interesting, exciting thing happening that you just have to turn the page and find out what happens next, chapter 3 is end of chapter 3 is a great spot for it. Or you can do it by words too. Sometimes they request the first 10,000 words, or 10,000 words is actually kind of a lot. So it varies by agent by agent, but normally they're going to ask for like either. Sometimes it's 10 pages, I think is what I meant to say. Sometimes they'll ask for 10 pages, and then you just look at your manuscript and you're like, okay, well, I guess they have no way of actually measuring where the pages begin and end, so just roughly estimate how many words is that going to be, and then just paste that into the email. Sometimes they'll ask for first 3 chapters. Sometimes they ask for just 1 chapter. So it really varies, but 3 chapters seems to be the most common. Okay, so let's go into this stuff for class today. We have just a couple slides, and then this was mostly going to be a work day where I will turn the microphone around to you, and you will take us through your whole story or what you have of it. I'm just going to give you an example of what that would look like beforehand. Also, I wanted to announce the date and time for Joel's upcoming Python Bootcamp. Thank you for sharing that, Joel. That's going to be starting near the end of next month. if you're interested in learning coding in Python, that's going to be starting on the 20th of November at noon Pacific time. So that's going to be Sundays at noon starting then. So in about a month from now, if you have interest, that'll be on Codecamp. Thanks for that, Joel. All right, so let's go into our first slide here, and I'm going to just give you some tips and suggestions on what does it look like to take us through a story. And so if you want to get really good at this, it might even be worth going back to our pitching boot camps that we did with Scott Barkan earlier this year, where we focus on the idea of communicating the story in as simple, followable, and effective terms as you can. It doesn't mean you have to include absolutely everything. In fact, the art of really good pitching is realizing what you don't need and what you can excise and what you shouldn't be including, because you have a limited amount of time to do this, maybe like 5 minutes at the most. You're going to want to pick that central protagonist to follow and explain the gist of their journey. You don't really have to give us a comprehensive portrait of every single subplot. So, a couple things to start with. Remember, logline genre comps always comes first, and you can give a little more explanation of the tone or the intention behind it if you want to. You can say, this is a fun middle grade fantasy book along the lines of Harry Potter. You can start with something like that, or you can explain it in whatever terms you want, but logline genre and comps are just kind of the basics. Okay, so then the next goal is you want to ground the reader in the world of this so they know what they're to be imagining. So time period or world or location are really important to start with. You rarely just want to leap right into the story and start saying, this guy does this and this guy does that, if we don't know when or where we are. So you might say something like, this story takes place in a small town in Rhode Island, or in 1950s Algeria, or in a fantasy world roughly equivalent to medieval China. So just have an explanation of it that is, just a couple words like that. We don't want to go on and on and on about this, but just in as reductive terms as possible, try to just ground us in the reality of the work that you're creating.
Wait, can you give the example again? I'm sorry, I lost the screen that you're displaying on. Hold on. Can you re-say what you just said?
Sure. So if you say something like, this takes place in a fantasy world roughly equivalent to medieval China, for instance, that would just be like a simple way of explaining that. Or you can say, like, this is a prehistoric fantasy world that takes place in roughly the Jurassic period, something akin to that. Like, you just kind of compare it to something of Earth. It can be a really useful way to do that. Or if it's not like Earth at all, then just maybe have a simple explanation for it. You could say, like, this takes place in a kind of space fortress. Like, might just be the simplest explanation you have. But it's helpful to compare it to something on Earth. If you're like, this takes place in a space monarchy. Okay, we know what a monarchy is.
Right. Okay, so, thank you. Thanks.
Sure. So think along these lines. This is from the kind of Pixar storytelling rules list. Once upon a time there was blank, every day blank, one day blank, because of that blank, because of that blank, until finally blank. And we might fill those things in with, once upon a time there was adjective protagonist, right? That's in your logline. You already have that. Every day blank, that's going to be your intro, basically, the first 10% or 8 to 10% of your book. One day blank, that's the catalyst. Because of that, blank, that's your break into two. Because of that, premise scenes, until finally, that's like the finale.
Oh, I have those blanks. I'm really excited. That's really
great.
Fun.
Oh, perfect. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, if you figure these things out beforehand, then it becomes easier to expand it, because you can just fill in the Mad Libs.
Well, and also it kind of depends on, like, how high level, like, this makes me feel like, okay, I do have the really high level beats and I have the emotional arc, which I think is a real clear lesson. And that makes me feel good. Like, okay, I do have something solid, even though there's a lot not fleshed out yet. So
yeah, I think you do, for sure. That's what going from story beats to scene cards is about. If really good story beats are going to have those pillars, those really key moments, and basically the most important ones are here. And then expanding that into scene cards is filling out all that connective tissue in between, and making sure to not say, like, oh, these are the exciting moments, how do I fill in the boring stuff? You actually have to make the stuff in between just as entertaining and exciting as those hugest blockbuster moments and things like that. So, last tips on this: simplify, focus, combine characters, hop over detours. You'll feel like you're losing valuable stuff, but it sets you free. I don't mean combine characters like, as you're explaining the story, but just as you're plotting, you can maybe realize, oh, I don't need 3 characters to fill out that role. I can do that all with one of them. Instead of having a whole organization be against my main character, maybe I just have the head of that organization that represents it. Can be a nice way to sort of simplify and combine. So you want to get away with as few characters, as few plot points, and as few moving pieces as you need, as you require. So you got to cut away the stuff that is getting in the way. So I think I'm just going to take you through an example of what this would kind of look and sound like I'm going to take you through my most recent book, which is called The Dreadful Edgar Bonesworth. So let's look at the basics before we begin. So remember, start with genre, age category, and you can give us the word count if you want, but if you haven't read the book yet, maybe you're not sure what the word count is. So I'll just tell you this is an adult fantasy book that's about 74,000 words. Here's the logline, or kind of the brief description of it. Freed from his tomb after 100 years, the reanimated skeleton of a gentleman bandit teams up with 2 grave robbers to recover his lost treasure vault. But first, he must defeat a brutish new highwayman seeking the treasure for himself. So that's just like the logline that I use to keep myself on track and to explain what the story is in its most basic. We have a main character. What are they trying to do? What is he trying to accomplish? What's standing in the way? And what is the kind of hook of the story? The hook of this story being the main character is a walking, talking skeleton. So I think that I will maybe set a timer for myself, or just time myself to make sure that I don't go on too long. I'll just see how long it sort of takes to just bring you guys through the essentials of the synopsis here. So I'll bring up this stopwatch on my phone. And don't feel pressured, like you don't actually have to time yourself, but I'm just going to like flag you if you're going way over 5 minutes, because then that's a sign that you may just need to simplify more in the explanation or perhaps in the story itself. So let's go through Bonesworth, and I'll just inform you, you don't have to tell us this necessarily, but this is present tense, first-person POV with just one POV character, so the whole thing is written by the skeleton bandit. We're not jumping around in points of view or anything like that. Okay, so let me set my timer here, and we'll just go straight through it. I've never done this. I've never just explained this whole thing before. I do have a synopsis to help me out because I'm in the process of querying this book. It's okay if you can't do this exact sort of thing yet. You might just need to finish the book before you can really effectively do this. I understand that right now we're still figuring out what the story is, so the reason that I'm having you do this today is to try to get you thinking about how all these pieces fit together and identifying where the major problems are. Okay, let's talk Bonesworth. So this is set in the New Jersey Territory in 1775. Early, this is colonial America, a fantasy book, historical fantasy set in that time period and place. So Edgar, our narrator, has been dead for a century. He's the reanimated skeleton of a Robin Hood-style bandit who's been trapped in his crypt with the shambling remnants of his old gang. Edgar doesn't remember how they got that way or many details of his history, but he spends his long nights dreamily leafing through the legends and old folklore books, dreaming to reclaim his former glory as the, lauded protector of his homeland. He wants nothing more than to escape the tomb and to become the beloved protector of the Pine Barrens once again. And his wish is finally granted when one day, 2 grave robbers blow a hole in the wall with gunpowder. He meets Godwin, who's a hedonistic young redcoat on the hunt for Edgar's lost riches, and his partner, Vasilia, who's a teenage Siberian mystic, hoping to recover a family heirloom which she believes is hidden in Edgar's stash as well. Both are disappointed to find no treasure at all, only a skeletal guardian who doesn't remember almost anything about himself. But Edgar is thrilled as the more he talks to them, he can feel dormant parts of his memory sparking to life. So he makes a deal with the looters. If they let him out of the crypt, he'll lead them to the treasure, and they'll split it 3 ways. So this partnership takes this trio of unlikely friends out of the tombs and into the Pine Barrens, which is a melting pot of trappers, hunters, former slaves, and indigenous traders. This is a real, place in this time, which I thought was very interesting. Edgar is really overjoyed to return to this homeland that he loves, but his excitement dies when he discovers the roads are now under the control of a new breed of highwaymen, the brutish, disgraced noble named Matchlock Francis, whose carnage has left the residents of the Pine Barrens living in fear. So Edgar learns that Francis is also looking for the treasure. So there's, lots of people are out looking for it. Everyone has rumors and legends of where it could be and what it can contain. And Edgar, in fact, finally convinces Vasilia to reveal what's inside it that's so valuable. She tells him it's a genie lamp. So Edgar's trio has to race the bandit for the vault, only to fail at the last moment. At our midpoint, Francis gets the lantern first and essentially wins. He uses the power of the genie in the treasure stash to turn himself into a genie, and uses that to take over the territory, cementing his tyrannical control of the region. So now Edgar finds himself, completely defeated at the midpoint, basically. The bad guy seems to have won, and now he has to readjust his tactics and teach his companions how to become highwaymen in order to wage a kind of guerrilla war-style campaign against the genie and his magically infused troops. So, in our final act, a run-in with one of Edgar's old enemies, a soul-stealing monster called the Jersey Devil, gives him an idea. He lures Matchlock Francis to the grove where the devil lives, and he essentially tricks the devil into taking Francis, and therefore defeating him forever. So, in our last moments before he's taken away, Matchlock Francis reveals to Edgar something that blows his mind to learn. Francis has discovered that this skeleton, this walking, talking skeleton that has been our main character the whole time, he's not who he thought he was at all. He is, in fact, not the dreadful Edgar Bonesworth. He was one of his reanimated servants. He was just like a guard for the tomb and a builder that he used to construct all these traps and crypts and stuff. So our main character's sense of identity is kind of shattered by this, and he has to lean on his new friends to, reconstruct his sense of self and what he's meant to do next. So now, with their help, he comes to conclude that he is going to keep the name of Edgar, even though he's not, this fabled bandit that he always thought he was. And he comes to realize he might be a very old man, but he is a very young skeleton. And now that he's free from the baggage of his old legacy, he's going to set out to create a new one. So with the Pine Barrens liberated and Francis defeated, Edgar and his new chums leave the New Jersey territory to wander the colonies as a band of merry, heroic thieves. Even without lungs, Edgar can feel as if he can breathe for the first time in years. All right, that was 3 minutes, 58 seconds. So,
that is a great story, by the way. That is super awesome. I see all the elements working together with, and very creative, and the way you described it was really good too. Adding a few little lines, of ways that, like at the very end, like that he feels he can breathe for the first time. Like I can tell you probably use that in this book as well. And that was cool.
That's in the synopsis, and it's helpful if you have some kind of line like that just clarifies what the character's journey is. It feels really good. It feels like a really complete pitch version of it, I guess.
Yeah.
So if you can do that, try to, I suppose. And if you want to read this, I'd be glad to send it to you. I'm querying now. I have gotten like 15 rejections and no full requests, so we'll see. But anyway, everyone goes through that, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean anything, right? I mean, we always hear about how many rejections Harry Potter did, and right? Sure. I mean, not that that's like everybody uses her as an example. It's like, okay, we're enough of that, but yeah, I mean, people are risk averse, like you said, right? And when they're exploring like fantasy, it's like when you were saying in the beginning, they were trying to figure it out. It's like they want something that's new but the same, and so yeah.
And they're not all the people that rejected Rowling's Harry Potter or any of these great writers, they weren't like necessarily wrong for rejecting that author in that time. Like maybe it just wasn't a good fit for their catalog, or maybe they just didn't think that they didn't think that highly of the story, or any number of things like that. So,
right, they weren't into magic, or who knows, right? They weren't into fantasy that much, or
it could be kind of anything. You just have
but at the end of the day, they are looking for money, and so that's where it's like, if they were looking like, even if it's outside of my range, we could use that money to fund our other books, so, and they still made a mistake.
Yes, in pure business terms, you could call it a pretty big mistake. But you just never know what's going to make money. Like nobody was like, there wasn't like a trend for boy wizard books at the time. It wasn't like everyone was desperate for a boy wizard book, which is why it's so silly to kind of chase trends in the first place.
Right,
it's
exactly.
Like, no one was like, we need Harry Potter. Why won't somebody write Harry Potter? No, it just came out of nowhere. Of course it did.
Right.
So yeah, this is just some of the quirks and trials of doing this. Let me give you just a couple more tips on this before I turn it around to you guys. So in terms of the Bonesworth synopsis that I just went through, quick questions that we should just definitely have the answers to. So number one question: whose story is this? So if I think that this is pretty clear, is the name of the book. This is Edgar's story, right? So sometimes people pitch a story and we're at the end of it, we're like, wait, but who was that actually about? Like, whose story is this? Is a super common question. So there should be absolutely no doubt as to whose story it is. Although books have like more so than movies, you can have protagonists of sort of equal weight, whether you want to do like a two-hander or something like that. It's easier because you just have so much more space in a book, but usually we're still going to want to know who is that central A character, except in those rare cases where they will be completely even. So, whose story is this? Edgar. What is his goal? Liberate his homeland and reclaim his treasure. What does he really need? You might ask this question. This isn't going to be super common, but it's helpful to know how the character's want differs from their need or whatever. So, what does he really need? To let go of his old legacy and to become his own man. What's standing in his way? Well, we have an antagonist that's mentioned in the logline, so a brutal new highwayman who's taken over his homeland and is seeking the treasure for himself is the answer to what's standing in our main character's way. And then we might ask, what's the character journey? So, remember how he ended by saying Edgar can breathe for the first time in years? Well, I would clarify that journey and expand on that by saying Edgar goes from imprisonment to freedom. Really simple way of thinking of it and explaining it, but he starts the book trapped in his crypt, and then sort of literally trapped by the expectations of his legacy, and he's sort of trapped in this character that over time he's forgotten who he is, so he's convinced himself, I'm the dreadful Edgar Bonesworth, right? So whether it's the walls of his crypt or the shackles of this legacy, he breaks those chains and he decides to forge his path as a new man, free to have all the adventures that he wasn't able to in life. He basically has to die to be born. So you should just be able to kind of answer that question. What is the character's journey? They go from this place to this place, and then maybe expand on it in a sentence or two to just clarify how they change. Stories are about change. Stories are about people suffering and things changing, basically. There aren't really stories about happy people, and there aren't really stories, or there are not very many good stories about people staying exactly the same. Though occasionally that can sort of be part of the fun of that story if it's like something like Seinfeld or Always Sunny, which is very funny that they never change because it would seem logical that they would, considering that all their schemes go to, they ruin their lives so much, and they're constantly dragging each other back down. The fact that they never change is part of the fun of that story, or certain iconic characters like Sherlock Holmes or James Bond or things like this. Do they really change that much from story to story? No, but then again, usually some other character is going to then take precedence in that narrative as the kind of sub-lead, and that person will change more. Like Watson, for instance. Watson does change much more than Holmes does over the course of their adventures. So pretty much that's how it's going to work. Either you have a substantial main character change, or if your main character doesn't, then they're kind of a steady rock throughout the entire thing, and maybe the world changes around them, or their lack of change affects a change in someone else, like in Ferris Bueller's Day Off is a good example of that, where Ferris is the same the whole movie, but it's Cameron who really needs to be changed by that journey. So yeah, just some thoughts there on character journey and how you might want to clarify that, and if you're able to do that in just this quick explanation version, then you can definitely do it in the book. So if you can think maybe in terms of how would I explain this in a short, just 5-minute condensed synopsis, or either spoken or written in about 2 pages of written work would explain this, then sometimes that will help you figure out the basics of what the story is, and thus help you figure out what needs to go between those moments a little better. Okay, questions on taking us through the story? You guys all think you can do this okay?
Yep, I'm writing mine out right now, so don't make me go first. But yeah, okay. I'm looking forward to this part.
Okay, who wants to go first? Just bring up your story beats or scene cards, whatever you've got, and just take us through it.
I guess that would be me.
Great. Okay.
I volunteer, Carmen.
Okay, Carmen's been volunteered. It's like, I just watched Squid Game, so I've seen a lot of this recently. That's when you shove somebody forward, right, to make them volunteer. So you can link us something to look at while we are listening, if you feel that would be helpful, or if you have something that, like, if you want to just link us the document that you're reading from, or anything else like that. Do you have anything that you want to link us?
I do. I can share this.
Sure.
The sketchbook.
Okay.
So I'll just copy the link.
Sounds
where
good.
anyone can view. Okay, it's kind of easier. But I don't know about reading from that document because I just started writing my synopsis, because you have to have a synopsis, which is really, I'm really glad that you're doing this with us, because the synopsis was the hardest thing for me to write on my last book. And I think the reason why I went way out in left field in the actual work, but the synopsis actually works for that book. But because I didn't write, obviously, in the synopsis, I don't write all of these tangents, you know, that I went on. So if I would have just followed the synopsis, then I didn't write it until I had finished the entire book. So
I see.
I really think that writing the synopsis is key. You really have to have it.
It's
So
helpful,
like
yeah.
before you finish the book, because it's like a log line, except a lot more detailed, right? It's a roadmap.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm really glad you brought this up, because I keep writing and I don't have these things in place. So I need to try to make sure that I'm not going to mess myself up. So I did start writing it, and this is what I have just now. Okay. Mally Grayson.
Wait, pause 1 second.
I might change that.
Let me just pause you 1 second. So I'm going to just put the clock on, and at 5 minutes, I'm just going to wave you just to indicate that that's around the time that you want to start wrapping up. But don't feel don't rush. Yeah, don't feel pressure.
Okay, yeah. What I wrote so far is like maybe a 5-second or 10-second thing. But
well,
I can try to go
on. If you don't have the rest of it, just try to explain it. Just like off the top of your head, just tell me what happens in the story.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Mally Grayson, which I don't know if I'm going to keep that last name, a plant scientist and junior lieutenant on a recon fleet. I need to change that. U.S. Navy recon fleet steals a plant sample from the coral of the Barents Sea. When the Russian Federation drops a chemical bomb on the ship, Mally survives. All 363 passengers on board perish, and he's taken to the Wilson Barracks Hospital in Germany, where he meets Nurse Neve. He spends several weeks hearing her voice while in a coma. Upon waking, the doctors remove the bandages from his face to see that he's completely healed and doesn't even have a scar. Okay, so besides that, he's wondering, Nurse Neve has disappeared somewhere. He doesn't know where she's at, and he's been asking around about her. And his sister comes and tells him that she's made a decision that they're going to relocate to New York, and she can take her work with her. Okay. So one of the family friend of theirs comes with her, and I'm not really sure in particular the role that he's going to play that's significant to this plot, but he's there, and just kind of exposing things by talking. And so he's very suicidal. He goes outside for the first time in a really long time and has a conversation with the security guard before he goes forward to attempt to commit suicide. So he's hanging off the bridge right now. But what happens is he relocates to New York City. He obviously does not commit suicide. I'm not sure how I'm going to get him to get out of that mindset, but something's going to happen right now. Something is going to happen that's going to get him out of that mindset. And he's going to end up in New York City, just for the fact that there's a military hospital there where they can keep an eye on him. They have a drone now following him around, taking photos. He's trying to crush the drone with his hands. He can never get a hold of it, because they've made these drones to where they're very, very responsive to human activity and even to human emotions. And so basically everything has become where, because of severe weather events, and I think I established that it's the year 2045, but I think I might need to make it more ahead in time. I don't really know why. And the other thing is I have to figure out the whole burns of the face because I'm thinking a few weeks. He should have scars. He does not have any scars. There's no evidence of him ever having been injured in the manner that he was. So I'm going to be I guess I'm going more into detail. Let me give more of like what would be a synopsis. Okay, so he goes to New York City and reestablishes himself there and meets a man who owns a convenience store underneath the building where he lives, that's where he meets Adelaide, the psychic. She's a fake psychic. And Miss Pasternak, who becomes an important friend to him. He has been keeping the plant on the windowsill of his apartment, which is really close to where Miss Pasternak lays her head down to go to sleep every night. So, there's kind of like this mystery of, wow, she's like, doesn't want to die. Like, she won't die. She's like 125 years old. Okay. So something like that. I'm not sure about the age, but I don't know if you guys know this, but there are civilian workers who get stationed in different places all around the world, in military hospitals, and they work with they do different jobs. And so Nave actually ends up at that hospital where she gets restationed there. So he actually sees her again. So then they start a relationship, and they start to notice that the law enforcement forces of their city, there's something unusual about them. They're not normal people. They are very, very aggressive. And sorry. Okay, I'll be done now.
No, you can wrap up.
Oh, okay. So what happens? We know that he's going to end up, starting the urban gardening movement. And what's going to happen actually is that this plant is going to be the key for solving the agricultural crisis that the world has been subjected to.
Oh, the plant that he got from the bottom of the ocean?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. How is it going to do that?
I'm not sure yet. I haven't figured it out.
Okay. So I don't think did we even get halfway through the story?
Well, I'm 27% into the writing, and I'm the farthest I've gotten, because I keep going back to flesh things out in different previous chapters, is him and Neve. They have, or Neve, you could say Neve too. I kind of like Neve. So I know you say Neve. I kind of, I think right now, the farthest I've gotten is the developing of their relationship, from what I all, which is
there's a ton of story beats on here though. You're not sure what happens from the middle to the end?
I'm still trying to figure out. Yeah, I'm still on the beats, I think. Okay. Unless my problem is right now is that I'm not refusing, but I have this problem of not referring as much as I need to the sketchbook, although I think I left a message saying that the scene cards were working, or the beats, or whatever, the sketchbook was working before, because I read one line in one of the whatever it is there, scene cards or beats or whatever I have there, and that whole line became like a whole bunch of pages.
Okay.
So yeah, so that worked. That's working. So what I need to do is get my beats and everything down perfectly before I continue to go forward and then get lost.
Right. Yeah, so we were, I don't feel like I really got a super comprehensive picture of what happens in the story, because maybe you're still figuring out exactly what is supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Maybe just without looking at any of the documents or anything like that, just let's just talk it out in like as simple terms as possible. I'm just going to synopsize what you told me for the like first act. So there's a naval diver that is working in the year 2045 in like kind of like semi-apocalyptic scenario where it's a devastated landscape where there's a lot of radioactive fallout. He goes down to the bottom of the ocean and recovers a strange plant. Shortly afterwards, his ship is bombed, and he's the only survivor. And somehow, he doesn't actually seem to be very injured, or he recovers very quickly from his injuries. This means that, as a result of this, the government now starts to monitor him. And it would seem that they're following him around because they suspect something's wrong with him, I suppose. Can you just take it from there and just tell us? Go ahead.
The government is hoping to make like a super soldier.
Okay.
If they can figure out exactly what has caused him to be able to emerge so strongly. One of the things that's going to happen before he is discharged from the hospital is he's going to run outside in the middle of the night really, really fast, inhumanly fast. And that's going to be kind of like, well, now he's no longer suicidal. Now he can go on with life, but he's going to have another, he's going to have more struggles before that's what's happening right now because he's been drinking a lot and he is just struggling with the loss of the commander, his friend, his beloved friend, and then also the fact that, like you guys were saying the last time, oh, why did I survive kind of thing, right? Yeah, so I've been thinking about that too.
Okay. So let's go through just what you don't have to, this doesn't have to be perfect, you don't have to have all the answers, but let's just talk through from here to the end, just in as broad, general, far back terms as you can. Let's just try to say what happens in the story. So he we're past the catalyst, right? So we're heading towards the break into two. In the debate portion, he's wondering, why did I live? What's happening to me? And then let's take it from there, right? Doesn't he start transforming?
Yes, and it already started happening within the first 10 chapters, but I would have to find exactly where I started writing this. Okay. He starts noticing that, he has a lot of like muscle, but he didn't work for it. Like he hasn't been working out or anything. And he's starting to shape out like really muscular and cut, right? And he's also very sensitive to certain things. In particular, he knows supernaturally that the smoke of Hillel's cigarette is causing a significant rise in tragedies around the city. I'm not sure if Hillel I think that I'm not really sure about him. I got to learn more about him and what his operations are. Because I think it's going to be far more than just the smoke of his cigar causing, tragedy all over the city. So he's actually learning little by little. There's already been one such event. The smoke from his cigar rose up to a balcony of an apartment building where there's a man and woman. He's able to see this man and woman arguing and a revolver on the table in that home. And when he sees this through the walls, right? This is, what's his name? Mally. And it's in the newspaper or wherever he hears it, because I'm not sure if newspaper would be the correct. I have to go forward with continue creating this futuristic world that's not like paper and pens anymore, right? Because it's in the future. Like even now, we're on computers and phones more often.
Sure. In certain apocalyptic scenarios, sometimes people do go back to older versions of media, or like just technological limitations might lead to we won't always have the internet or things like that to use. But regardless of that, I think we're just getting a little distracted. We just need to focus on the plot. So we're just trying to say what happens in the story. So your main character starts we didn't even mention that he starts transforming into an angel, which is kind of the hook of your book. It's on the cover. The main character, after this bomb has seeming like chemically burned him. He's recovered miraculously. He's dealing with grief as survivor's guilt after this loss, and then he realizes he's transforming. Can you just take it from there and try to just focus on the plot?
Okay, so he's transforming, and all of these, signs of who he really is, are coming up. And part of that has to do with hearing the voice of the commander, because the commander somehow knew something that about him that he didn't ever know about himself. So there's some stuff already about him, really. Am I getting distracted again?
Yes, just the plot.
Okay.
So he starts to notice: is he growing
Okay.
wings, or what's the transformation exactly?
Okay, so the wings, I've been having a problem with the wings because, he's once he has these wings, he's gonna have to be able to put them away sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Sure. Okay.
And
What's the problem?
so that, I don't know, it's just hard to. I'm not gonna do the thing like what I did with Isidore, where they strap them down,
Okay.
where remember?
Well, it could always be. You can. It's fantasy. You can come up with whatever you want. Maybe nobody else can see them, or like maybe only devils and angels can see them, or like
Okay,
maybe everyone can just see them, and he doesn't have a way of concealing them. That'd be kind of cool too. So you can address
really?
that issue however you want. Yeah.
Okay. So he's transforming into an angel,
Okay.
and what yeah, I think, well, of course he's gonna pursue Hillel, and he already has started to do that, just kind of tracking him down, like, okay, this guy, they met up in a jail cell somehow. I don't know why Hillel is in the jail cell. I think that he actually made himself appear in there just so he could have that little conversation that they had in there. So one of the powers that Hillel has to be able to have is the ability to walk through walls, I think, in
Okay.
order to do that. Well, he is like a devil, so devils can do that, right? They should be able to
It's fantasy. You can make all the
disappear.
rules. You can say devils can shoot lasers out of their eyes and fly through the sky and drop nuclear bombs out of their armpit. Like you can do anything. It's entirely your world
Okay.
here. So
It's
whatever you want.
really hard. This is really hard for me. I'm really like, this is hard, like coming up with like pretend things. So
Coming up with pretend. You mean
I'm
writing? That's what writing is, right?
well, yeah, it's just this isn't like something that was like inspired by something really.
Okay.
Well, maybe, I mean, of course, right? Because it would have had to have been inspired by something. So those are the things I realize now talking to you that I need to figure out. What are the powers that Hillel has, and what are the powers that Mali has? As he's transforming, he has to learn about his powers, right? And try them out and things like this, right?
Sure.
Okay, so I need to start getting to that part now, being that I'm 27% into the writing,
I think more important
right?
than that is figuring out what happens in the story. Like, just the specifics of the powers aren't as important. I mean, they do inform what happens in the story a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
and when we've talked about the story bits before, I think we've gone pretty far. Like, I thought at some point you maybe even went all the way to the ending or had an ending in mind. Is there going to be a kind of final battle that we're building towards, or a final confrontation of some kind between your hero and your villain?
Yeah, there's gonna have to be.
Okay.
Oh yeah, he ends up in the abyss, I think is what I have. He ends up, I think what it is, I can't remember all those. I would have to look at my document.
Okay, but so just in terms of taking us through the story, we would maybe say something like your main character realizes he's turning into an angel. He struggles with this, the challenges that this
Okay.
presents. In the meantime, though, he's pursuing the demon that caused all this to happen. And so like we would just sort of summarize. You don't have to give us every single scene, but you would just say something like, he clashes and struggles with this demon as he tries to overcome him until finally he's forced to go down into hell itself, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then you would just describe
Right
sort of
there.
what happens there. Go ahead.
Right. Well, I wanted it to be where he would return back to the scene of his crime. And that's where one of the entrances,
What crime?
one of the stealing of the sample that belongs to
Oh, was
the
that a
federal
crime?
government.
Okay.
Yes, he was not allowed to take that.
Oh,
And that's
okay.
part of the reason. Yeah, that's part of the reason why Neve has that is actually the reason, but I think that she has something against the government. I got to figure that part out because yeah, because there's a plot hole there. So I have to kind of figure that part out. But yeah, he's gonna at the very end, he's gonna return to the abyss. Because in the writing, there is an abyss there. It's a drop off from the bottom of the sea,
Hmm.
and it's an entrance into hell.
Right.
And so they're gonna end up there. So I wanted him to return back to that spot where he's gonna have the victory.
Great.
And
Okay.
then I don't know how he's gonna manage doing the urban gardening with the wings. That's the part
How
that
did we
kind
get
of
to urban gardening from a story about a guy fighting a demon as a transformed angel? How is this related or relevant to? I guess you're saying this is gonna be. It relates to that plant that he took. He's gonna sort of maybe figure out a way that people can take the seeds that germinate from that plant and revive agriculture somehow, something like that.
Yes, and that's one of the things that has to occur is or be a part of this story is that Hillel has some kind of authority over famine
Okay.
of the state of the world's food supply.
Sure.
That's
All right.
part of this.
Okay, I could see that
So
work. So
how
go
is
ahead.
how is that going to happen? So sorry. So the way you said it, because you said the beginning, because you have a gift of communication, obviously, like verbal communication. You know that, right?
I hope
You're
so. I
you're
hope
aware of that.
surely hope that's the case. Thank you.
Okay. So only with certain topics I do. Um, so he's going to survive this thing, and then he's gonna pursue Hillel, and all of these other things are kind of like on the side. So I need to be able to tell the story like if it was a log line, kind of, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So
So what
maybe
about
writing that synopsis out would be helpful. Go ahead.
how it says an avatar of heaven, which is, you gave me that idea, survives a chemical bomb explosion for the purpose of transforming into a warring angel created to defeat the fallen angel Hillel. So then that that kind of tells it from beginning to end. But in between all of that is what you're saying. What happens in between? An avatar of heaven survives a chemical bomb explosion. Then what's in between that and he defeats the fallen angel Hillel when he returns to the coral reef of the abyss and follows him into hell.
Right.
Defeats
Yeah.
him on his own territory, apparently.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, for this portion, it's helpful to just be able to explain what happens in about 5 minutes. The major points. You don't have to include everything. You don't have to include every subplot or every side character. But we just want to, like I did in the example, just kind of focus on the main character's journey. That will be the clearest and cleanest way through it for the most part.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe for next
I'll
time,
try to.
you'll be able to flesh out the scene cards more, and actually figure out what those moments are going to be later on. Maybe it will get a little easier to explain it all in one go. It's okay if you can't do it at the moment, but yeah, just it's a sign that it's just like we have to figure out the story at some point, whether that is by trying to write it or by planning it beforehand. It seems like maybe you're doing a little bit of both, which is okay. You got to just find what works best in your method. But if you get the book done, then that's the major hoop to jump through, and it seems like you're making good progress in it.
Okay, but I'll definitely do that 5-minute story.
Yeah, challenge yourself. Challenge yourself, and once you have that, then it kind of shows that you have a pretty strong command of what the story is.
Okay, so what I told you at first, this the Mally Grayson, a plant scientist, blah 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 blah. then they see that he doesn't even have a scar, like he was never burned. So then from there, just tell what happens, right? And don't go over 5 minutes for the next time. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if you think you can
I
for
think
next
I
time.
can handle it.
Okay.
Okay, I think I can do this.
Okay. So maybe write out a couple paragraphs of just the main stuff, just the main events, and
Okay.
try not to trail off on tangents. Try to just stick to those, what happens in the story and how it's affecting your main character.
Okay, and I had to do this for a book before, and it was really hard for some reason. It was only 1 page, a synopsis. But
Yeah,
for
a lot
some
of
reason,
authors do struggle with this.
yeah, it's like it's easier to write the book. Isn't that weird?
A lot of people
Because the
feel
book
that
is
way,
so long.
yeah. It's more common than you'd think, but yeah, it's kind of one of those funny things where it's harder for some people to write the short version than the long one. We see that all the time. Okay, we're gonna move to the next person, but thank you for doing this, and yeah, try to just figure out what the story is before you, like, if you don't know what you're working towards, it's hard to write really good scenes. You might come up with good stuff along the way, but then it's just gonna end up being that you have to reorganize after the fact. So plenty to do there, but good progress so far. Thanks, Carmen. Who wants to go next?
I mean, I have my outline. I mean, you don't. I mean, you can open the outline, but I'll read along.
Okay.
There isn't. I'll practice my 5-minute.
Sure. Let me know when you're ready.
Description, and then hold on let me. So, well, first of all, just a little. So after I actually did do a lot of work since last Saturday, just but I didn't flesh out all of the missing links, but I did kind of strengthen what I already had.
Mm-hmm.
So remember how I described what I was working on in fantasy class, and you were like, "Can you remember how you said that?" Because it was like a very different way of describing the book than my log line.
Right.
And so I kind of. And it was just, it's the same story, but it was really a description of the emotional journey. So I practiced that a little bit. I wish I had written it right after, but I did it like the next morning, and I couldn't quite remember exactly what I said, but I got down, like it's a coming of age tale about a girl who, grows up in a kingdom that she thinks is a wonderful place, and has to, learn the hard lessons that, what she thought was good is actually corrupt, and has to make a tough decision about, defending her home and fighting for a bigger cause of justice and good. That's kind of like the emotional journey of the character. I couldn't quite do it as well as I described in the class, but
that's okay. You'll come up with just one strong sentence for that at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I just took your Pixar thing, and that's my I'm gonna just read it out and see how it goes.
Okay.
I don't think it's gonna be 5 minutes.
That's right.
So, once upon a time, there was an 8-year-old daughter of the King's Guard who thought she lived in a freedom-loving, benevolent kingdom. Who loved her schoolwork, studies, and math and mythology, playing with her friend Quinn, watching the bustling marketplaces, and imagining herself as a knight like her father someday. One day, the kingdom falls under siege from one of its rebelling colonies, and a small battalion breaks through and kidnaps the king, her father, and Quinn, among others. The only reason she didn't get captured, too, was because she had run away earlier after having a fight with her friend Quinn about the kingdom's history. And she was sulking, don't know exactly whether she was sulking in the secret place, or she was just like sulking in the kitchen or something, somewhere out of view. So, after going back to see what's going on with the kingdom and seeing that the enemy has soldiers staked out, she winds up descending into a secret passageway under the dungeon, And with some encouragement of a map she finds that can help her kind of navigate, she decides to venture further down to find this fabled druid that she had learned about in one of her classes, to help her save the kingdom. Because what else is she going to do? Go up aground and go into jail too? So she really, I mean, at some point, she really has no other choice but to go underground or just surrender and be captured. And so because there's no safe place above ground, she descends and seeks out the fabled druid, which is her only hope. Because of this, I'm just using the thing.
Sure.
She meets a light-bearing lampshade below the ground that shows her essentially the underbelly of the kingdom, various imprisoned creatures and colonies that have threatened the kingdom in the past and are now sort of suppressed below ground. Whoops. So, just lost my place for a second. Hold on.
A lampshade?
So while the kingdom appears to be at peace, at what cost to others? Like the kingdom's at peace internally, but look at what it's costing other people. So she learns that her home is not the idyllic place that she thought it was, and while also being primed to see change as welcoming. So, like, she has to kind of handle this harsh truth, but at the same time, there's this little creature she finds that transforms every 2 to 3 days. So she kind of gets like, she learns how to, you know, part of the challenge in sort of seeing your home, like, it's hard to see where you've grown up as now like the enemy. That's hard enough. But there's also just the inherent resistance people have to change, even when it's a good thing, right? People, oh, here's a bigger house you can move into. You know, even that can be like hard for people. So she kind of has this, these experiences that help her and to transform as a person down below. And then because of this, when she finally does find the druid, and realizes that the druid's not going to help save the kingdom, she's actually wanting to help the invading colony. She makes a decision to free these people underground and rally them together to, I don't have quite the ending worked out exactly. I mean, does the king get overthrown? How do they actually take over the kingdom? Because that's like 2 wrongs don't make a right. So I haven't figured out the very, very end exactly. I kind of have the decision she has to make at the end figured out, but not exactly. Like, they're freed. Maybe the king is usurped, is overthrown, but it's not like the invaders just take over, because that would just be another wrong. 2 wrongs don't make a right. So maybe the invading people, they recede, right? They're not actually there to take over. They just needed the king to not be there. And so maybe, you know, they help instill, maybe the druid becomes the leader of this, you know. So that's, yeah, there we go.
Okay. Thanks for that. You're actually right at 5 minutes with that, but
Oh, wow. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I rambled a few places.
Yeah,
I mean,
a little off track on a couple spots, but that's okay. Okay, so stuff that occurs to me. First of all, I don't know if it's necessarily that 2 wrongs don't make a right. Like, is it? It's wrong to shoot people, but is shooting a Nazi, that's 2 wrongs, isn't it? So, but like, if the people beneath the castle that have been, you know, shoved there suppressed for years and years, if they take over, I don't think the audience would be like, those monsters.
Right, that's true. I just
okay
think that. Right. I guess I'm wanting to, yeah, but I just have them be more peaceful. Like I'm gonna have them like they've captured the king. They don't kill him.
Yeah, they don't have to I'm gonna slaughter everybody. They might, you might have to take over in that the old regime is no longer in power. It's not like we
Yes.
have to have blood in the streets or anything.
Yeah, yeah, and especially for middle grade. Yeah, so I could just have them imprison them and um
Make them
and
live in a
maybe and yeah, and maybe
dungeon.
like yeah, and she and like what we will see in the beginning, I do have like a pretty clear like beginning and ending. So, in the beginning, we're gonna see her at work play and we're gonna see the whole kingdom as being this lovely place.
Mhm.
And then when the enemy attacks, there through her eyes are these scary, mean people. And then at the end, when she comes up, we actually see the enemies treating their captives much nicer
Sure.
than the kingdom was treating their captives.
Right.
And she's gonna kind of look around at like everything's just gonna take like the feeling of seeing things. There won't be a bustling marketplace, but things will look different, but it's also gonna feel a lot different with her new perspective.
I see.
So
So,
yeah.
so stories like this, where the main character, their central sort of journey is coming to see the flaws in the system that they exist
Yeah.
in, they usually work best if the main character is kind of the poster child for that system. So that would mean that your main character is the most outspoken. She's the one who, more than any of the other kids, is like, I'm glad that we have all these colonies. Like, I'm glad that we keep, because those people are monsters. Like, they're not like us, right? Like,
Right.
If
Yeah.
we see
Oh,
her-
yeah. She's gonna be very much like, thinking, that the kingdom is all perfect and everything. Yep.
And sometimes it works if they're not exactly a poster child for it. If they're just like a clear reject from, like, have you seen How to Train Your Dragon?
No.
Oh, great middle grade. One of the absolute best middle grade fantasy stories. You should check it out.
Okay.
But the main character, he lives on an island where the humans are at war with the dragons and have been for as long as anyone remembers. The dragons kill humans, humans kill dragons. That's just the thing. And human status, the status in their tribe is based on how many dragons you kill and things like that. And our main character is kind of a wimpy, scrawny little boy, but he's the son of the chief, so he's expected to be the best kind of dragon killer, right? So it's a similar sort of story where, the dragon, he accidentally shoots down a dragon with a net. He goes to kill it. He realizes, I can't do it. And then he starts to bond with the dragon. And then by the end, at the end of the story, I mean, can I spoil the ending for you? It's not. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
So at the end, the good guys win, believe it or not. I won't tell you exactly what happens, but the conclusion is, the humans and dragons actually work together because the main character has sort of trained one. And so now that he's made friends with it, I guess more accurately. Now that he's made friends with one, he uses it to sort of save the day. And as a result of that, people are like, oh, dragons aren't so bad. They were only killing us because we were killing them. So now humans and dragons can coexist, and it's awesome now.
That's a nice ending. Yeah.
So maybe you could, if everybody expects these monsters and these subjugated folk underneath the castle, like all the stories about them, everyone thinks that they're horrible, they're monsters.
Yes.
If we let them take over, they would eat us all. When they do take over, they're like, no, we're not actually like that. Maybe we can even coexist somehow. And you can see how the world can be different now that the main character has kind of come to learn that lesson. But I think that you're just going to want to really set up that your main character is either the poster child for this system, like the one that is even like, somebody speaks up and questions like, but should we really conquer all these people? And she's like, yes, we should.
Right. I definitely. Well, that's exactly. So I didn't go into that, but on the day one day the kingdom falls under siege, and the only reason she didn't get captured was because she had run away after having a fight with her friend Quinn about the kingdom's history. So that's that.
But related to the kingdom's history in terms of their.
And she's the one.
Okay.
Yes, and so she's the one who's saying no. The kingdom's the good guy, and so that's actually like it's interesting because the fight that they have about that, where she really takes the stand that she winds up coming taking a 180 on, that fight is actually what saved her from being captured as well. Sure. So there's like that's a key thing. I didn't go into that because I was trying to be succinct, but exactly about she's like not believing that the kingdom has done anything wrong, and he's
He's
Since
questioning
his father's an expedition knight, so he's actually seen what the kingdom does abroad,
Mhm.
whereas her father is a guard knight at home, so he doesn't see what's going on out there. So he's also somewhat blind
Sure.
to what's going on.
Okay, so they bought into the propaganda, basically.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So
I
having
know
lots of
it
propaganda will be
so
important.
sucks. I'm like, oh my God, my main character is bought into the propaganda. Like I never would have like if I that's never a character I would have like come to with like just off the top of my head.
Mhm.
But that is exactly how you've explained things where like, okay, I got to what character would benefit the most from this journey?
Mhm.
And it's like someone who's bought into the propaganda. And so that it the character got a little bit reverse engineered.
Right.
But she's always started out as sort of naive. Like it's not like I started out with her being a rebel,
Mhm.
but yeah. So the
And buying into
Yeah.
the propaganda is also called just being a kid, right? Like it's just
right. Yes,
anyone would.
exactly.
So I don't think anyone's going to hate your character.
No,
because-
no, no. Yeah.
because
Exactly. Yeah.
she's what, 8 years old? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is kind of part of the growing up thing. It's like they have to have a flawed worldview to begin with, or else they don't have any growing to do.
Right. And also I mean there is the metaphor too of even when you realize your own parents aren't perfect, that's a big thing. I don't know what age exactly that happens, but when, it's actually evolutionarily, biologically in your favor to feel like your parents are perfect when you're young, or you're not. Can you imagine a 3-year-old like not trusting their parents? I mean,
Right.
like that's not a, yeah, exactly. So it is actually a very healthy thing to trust the people that are taking care of you, because to not at the age of 4 or 5, is not in your interest.
It's dangerous, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's look at these quick questions. So whose story is this? I think we know that. It's very clear. It's Lucy's story.
Yeah.
What is her goal? Her goal is to save the kingdom, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So let me just go through it. I'll try to answer these, I guess, and I'll try to determine if I can't answer any of these. Wait,
Sure,
sorry, go ahead.
sure. Perfect. No, I was gonna say, and and save her father. That's kind of a little bit
save her
even.
father too. Okay. What does she really need? Well, she really needs to realize the truth, and the fact that her she was conditioned to believe that her kingdom was the good guys, but in fact they're not so good. Whether or not they're evil is like up to you if how exactly you want to play that, but at the very least they're not as good as they've always said.
Mm-hmm.
What's standing in the way? Well, I don't quite know. What is standing in the way? What are the obstacles?
Right. I know that's the fun in the act 2. Yeah, that's I mean part of her obstacle, one obstacle to her getting what she needs is her own foibles.
Prejudice and
Yeah, her own prejudice. What's in the way of her saving the kingdom? Well, I mean, the character she meets, Fennec, could be somewhat mischievous. Like, I mean, I guess we could say, what's in the way? I mean, that's it's a really good point, because I don't know. That's maybe something that's missing is like what's not everything below ground is necessarily going to be good. Like there's got to be something in the way. Yeah, right. That's a good point. What is in the way?
monsters? I mean,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Real monsters?
Real monsters? Yeah, exactly.
Like, because the other thing are considered, yeah. Yeah.
So I'm guessing the obstacles in the cave might relate to both creatures in there, or also just the landscape and the difficulty of navigating the landscape of the cave.
Yeah, I think it's navigating the landscape to finding the druid. Well, and then I think Fennec, the guy the light. You've just given me a good idea for him. So his flaw, and this is still based off of, it's nothing original. It's based off of the Lampades, mythology, is they can be mischievous. So I can have him be a little bit unreliable. So like his role, like mythological role is showing people the truth, and sometimes people go crazy if they can't handle the truth. That's kind of the symbolism. But they're also mischievous, so he's a bit unreliable. So while he's maybe saying he's going to help her find the druid, he has like his own agenda of maybe pointing out, showing her these other creatures. And I mean, maybe some of the creatures that the kingdom has put down below were bad. Like maybe there is like an evil goblin colony down there, but there's also these other.
You're probably gonna want to go with if the theme of your story is coming to see that like no one's really perfect, but like they're like these subjugated people don't deserve to be down here. If you're gonna go with monsters, you probably want to go with more animal-like monsters that are not like that don't have the human level of sapience and intelligence, which goblins usually do have sapience and intelligence.
Okay,
so
yeah.
You might
okay,
so with,
like
there's shadow beasts, there's tentacle monsters, there's whatever you can think of.
Cave monster things. Okay.
Sure.
I was thinking of
just natural predators in the cave, really.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's just call them cave monsters for now.
Okay. Sure.
They're cave monsters.
So she has to navigate a treacherous cave filled with deadly beasts.
There we go. Thank you.
Okay. So the cave itself is a big part of the
black scorpions. That's cool.
Scorpions.
That's kind of. I mean, that's a monster. I mean, that's a animal.
Oh, Carmen says scorpions with human faces. Wow, that's pretty creepy. It's a very Lovecraft kind of monster.
I think scorpions are enough for me. I can see those being in the underworld.
Carmen says I stole that from God. Okay.
Do a mealworm with a tuft of hair. That's funny.
that's could be adorable or could be terrible.
Yeah, that could be really cute. Yeah.
So I think we're wrapping up with this one, but do you feel like maybe you have a little clearer sense of how presenting it like this might help you solve story problems?
Yes, it was really helpful. Yep.
And the character we talked about the character journey, so I think I had a clear sense of that. You led with that today, so
yeah,
we're good on the journey. That's the major question. So just in terms of pitching, it sounds, or not in terms of pitching, in terms of fleshing out the story, it sounds like second act is where you're going to want to really layer in some obstacles and some it sounds like the premisings are maybe the only thing that we don't really have. So
the glimp, she meets the glimp that metamorphosizes. It's not scary, but yeah, that's a fun and games thing.
Just might need to come up with more specific obstacles for a treacherous cavern, if that is indeed going to be part of the
that's
main,
true.
If that's the main antagonist of the the meat of the story. It seems like you don't really have a different antagonist, do you?
What was that? And yeah,
otherwise, I mean, is there even an antagonist besides the dangers of the cave?
No. I mean, except for the king. I mean, at home. But yeah, that's
right. But he's not even there for most of the story.
Right.
So.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you don't have to have a main antagonist. It can be helpful too. So you might think there's the scariest monster of them all.
Yeah.
That all the legends are about. Something like that might just make a nice sort of antagonist for the cave sequence. You don't have to do that.
Yeah.
But or it could just be a series of obstacles that she encounters in the cave due to its layout and also due to the monsters.
Or it could be like would this disappoint readers if I had a little bit of a fake out, like the legendary blah blah blahs, right, that they've eradicated, that she thinks are bad guys, but then when she finally, like, we keep hearing, they're approaching and we hear them and then finally when she meets them, they're actually nice.
I don't. Well, readers wouldn't necessarily be disappointed by that. We just can't go too many scenes without substantial conflict happening. So as long as it doesn't like undercut the conflict or reduce the sense of danger way too much, like if we run into one group of friendly monsters, that's fine. But we should remember the urgency of the situation. So don't make sure it doesn't feel like that's sagging in the middle.
Okay.
Thanks for this. I think we have one more. Nacho, do you want to do this today?
Actually, I have to drop out to help Cortland set up for the home studio lighting class, which is starting in about an hour.
Okay, sorry I didn't get to you. You can do this during lab or in
Sure. No worries. No
next
worries.
class if you want. Okay, thanks, Nacho. What else? Oh, hi, Joe Tool's here. Are you working on a book, Joe Tool, or just here to listen to the class?
Hey, is my mic?
Oh, yep, it's working. It's just so quiet. I'm gonna have to turn it way up.
Sorry about that. It's a bit it's quite so, yeah, I mean, I'm not quite working on a book, but I do find listening to what you guys are saying, kind of, yeah, I do find what you guys, like the process that you're doing, quite helpful, because I find sometimes, as much as a logline helps, I think I haven't actually taken the time to write like a type of, almost like a synopsis type brief of like what the actual story is about, like in the same like way of like concising it. Like I've tried writing out the beats, but the beats are still sort of like oversimplifying it to a little degree. And so I'm just finding it interesting hearing the process that you guys are talking about, because I think it could actually help me to just like specify a few things. So
Sure.
if you don't want to necessarily get into it, that's fine. But yeah, I mean, I'm finding this interesting and helpful to consider doing my script. So.
Great. Yeah, I don't usually do this with scripts where I don't write a synopsis for a script before doing it, but if you find it useful, then absolutely give it a try. For me, scene cards fulfill that function just because I write pretty detailed scene cards. But if you can, yeah, maybe it would help to just write out a full synopsis that takes about a page or two. Let me show you guys how long mine is. So it's just 2 pages like this, and in terms of words, it is going to be 592 words, and that's a little long. So about 500 to 600 words is what you want for just a synopsis. And this, you actually turn this, a lot of queries will want to include this, or a lot of agents will want you to include this in the materials that you send them. So just other little things, hints when writing something like this or when just conceiving of it. Focus on the character journey in terms of how this is affecting the main character. So like one trap that people can fall into in synopses like this is that they just say like a list of things that happen, but it's not like, and this makes him feel like this, and as a result of that, he does this next thing. So what I try to do in mine is where's an example of this? You just want to focus on how this. Here we go. Edgar. It's not just Edgar gets out of his tomb. Edgar is overjoyed to return to the homeland that he loves. That's what I mean by focusing on that character journey. So every time something changes for them substantially in terms of emotions or just those basic beats of their journey, you want to kind of highlight that. But his excitement dies when he discovers blank. So useful to keep that in mind. You don't have to go into tons of detail on the other characters, but if there are other major characters, probably at least mention them and give like a really quick explanation of who they are. Like in my synopsis, I barely even mentioned what Godwin or Vasilia do. I do introduce them and I say they're along for the journey the whole time, but I focus on the A story of Edgar. Does anyone have any questions about this whole process or about how they might start to explain or pitch their stories, or just figure out how they would conceive of the plots, or any questions like this based on anything we talked about today?
I mean, if nobody else, I don't want to be I know you guys are actually working on it. No, so I don't want to detract from that time. But, and I guess I missed a little bit of the beginning of what you guys were talking about, so this might be out of context, but I guess I'm just, I'm particularly struggling with my main relationship story and how to articulate that.
The central relationship? Okay. Well, we have lab later today if you want to ask about it there.
Okay. Yeah, too easy.
That'll be just 2 hours after this. So glad to take more questions on that at that point if you want. Did somebody just... Oh, Nacho ducked out to help with the class. Go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, so I didn't mean to unmute. Or,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. You're good. So, we're working on scene cards still for these books. We have you have 1 week to get everything in place and figure out where you're going and how you're going to flesh out each of these moments between the key sort of most important moments in the story beats outline. Books can have a lot of scenes. Excuse me. Books, I don't even know how many scenes are in a book. Nobody really counts. So a scene also, the scenes that connect these major moments also have to be, they can't all be interesting in the same way, and we have to keep in mind this idea of the scene sequel format that I talked about last week. Do you guys remember this? This is where you'll have a major important scene happen, and then the smaller scene that follows that will be the characters recovering from, processing what just happened, and planning what to do next, and all this kind of stuff, so that it's kind of the, quote, sequel to that scene. So as you are plotting and you're trying to figure out what happens in each of these moments, make sure that we have those moments in between where the characters are reflecting on what just happened and they're changing inside. And we have this ability in books to look into your characters' heads and to explain what is going on with them. So, like, especially in terms of Amanda's book, you have a main character that her entire worldview is changing, and that's kind of like the point of the story. So you have to build in those scenes for sort of reflection. It can't just be she rushes from moment to moment. You're going to have those scenes where and you put her with a companion, which is really good to have for this sort of thing. But for a book, you don't always have to. In a book, you can have a whole chapter that's just in the character's mind as they just, like, rationalize what just occurred. And maybe they imagine stuff, and maybe they recontextualize stuff in their minds. You can get a lot more into the inner workings of a character's mind in a book than you can in any other medium besides maybe plays sometimes. But plays usually are going to really focus on, modern style plays, they're going to be like scene, scene, scene. We're not going to have as much time that a book would give you. But in a book, you have unlimited soliloquy space, basically. And we need to chart your character's growth and believe and understand that character's growth. So you can't leave out those sort of sequel scenes where the characters are recovering from what just happened and they're planning on what to do next. And their sort of internal, their concept of who they are and what they're supposed to be doing and how they fit into the world is changing. Do you guys all have a pretty good sense of how that kind of self-reflections, or how those sort of self-reflections fit into a book? And how that might work in your story as we're tracking not just what's occurring, but we're tracking very carefully what's going on in your main character's head.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Like it's sort of like the action scene and the reflection scene, which is very intuitive way of life in general. So yeah.
And books also let you compress time however you want. So if your character's just like in the middle of a non-stop survival action mission, they're like raiding, they're raiding a drug lab. Their sort of, quote, sequel might just be they take a breather and they just think for a minute, right? Like, it could just be the character, they are, it could all takes place in the span of 5 seconds. But we have a whole chapter that is expanding and explaining, like, wait, was I supposed to do that? Am I doing my job right? Who am I anymore? Like, any of those things can fit into any span of time. So when it comes to books, you have a lot of freedom as to how you kind of frame that. Whereas in a movie, it's like we can't expand or shrink time in the same way.
Yeah, I actually just noticed that, I think in the Stealing Magic book, where there's a conversation between two kids that the girl is overhearing. And one kid says one thing, and then it's like 2 paragraphs of her sort of thinking about stuff. And then the other character answers. Now, obviously, the character asking and answering, the 2 guys talking, there wasn't a 2-paragraph length thing going on in between them. It feels very natural because, well, first of all, that a thought can be very quick. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, you can think about 4 different things in 2 seconds, right? Like, you can visualize it, but to say it will take 2 paragraphs. And so, yeah, like, you're right. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, that's a really good thing to remember.
Mm-hmm. And the character may not always be like, they aren't always thinking in terms of really rational, like, the book is an abstraction of the way that people actually think, right? Which is the character may not realize that they're having these revelations necessarily, or they may not be like tracking it as carefully. If you ask them, what are you thinking about during one of those 2 paragraphs, they might be like, what do you mean? What? Their response would probably just be, what?
Right.
Because they aren't like, that in sort of internal monologue is like our way of understanding something that's happening in split seconds. And because of that, you can expand it as much as you want. Like, especially read older books from like the 1800s. A character just makes tea, and like she picked up the spoon, and it reminded her of her childhood, and she poured the cup, and it reminded her of her husband, and she drank the tea, and it tasted like this, which reminded her of her time in Spain. And that might be a whole, like, you have to outline that stuff too, and that has to be you have to like allow those things to be in your outline, because that's just in a book. Those hold just as much narrative weight as any other scene does, because text is all we have. We don't really have some scenes that are going to be the high budget scenes, and some scenes that are going to be, the scenes that are just people talking heads in hallways. Those look the same on a book page. So everything has to have kind of like, even the moments that connect the major scenes are just as important as the scenes themselves. And they can't really exist without the build up to them and without the response and processing after they occur. Or else we just lose all sense of realism and like being in that world with that character. If, for instance, imagine your character kills somebody for the very first time, and then the chapter just ends, and then when we rejoin them, they don't really comment on it. They're like they seem kind of sad. We've missed a huge amount of what happened there. And so like I'm working on this book Sky Knight right now, and I'm realizing places where I will definitely have to go in and clarify what's going on with the character, because our main character is a criminal who joins the guards. She goes from essentially being a criminal to being a cop, who she doesn't trust at all. She doesn't like them at all. She thinks the system is inherently broken. To then put on that armor and to become that person, like, I think we need to have a scene where she puts on the armor piece by piece and realizes, like, the weight and importance of what you're about to do. And, like, this feels like I'm betraying everything I come from. And am I doing this just for money? And, like, all these things going on in the character's head. I'm going to have to add in a whole scene where we can't just skip over that stuff, or else it will feel like the character doesn't feel real anymore.
Yeah.
So there's just some tips for you and things to think about, stuff that if you're really used to watching and reading TV and movies, we don't always pay as much attention to the interiority of the characters, whereas books allow us to access that more frequently and more prominently than any other form of writing, because, some books are even in first person. Wait, Amanda, are you doing first person or third person?
I'm doing third.
You're doing third, okay. Yeah. But even within third, you can still go into the character's thoughts whenever you want, at least your main character. Usually the rule will be you can't go into anyone else's thoughts, but your main characters. That's the difference between third limited and third omniscient. Third omniscient would be you can go into anyone's thoughts at any time. This used to be much more common, but is really rare nowadays, and I don't recommend trying unless you know exactly what you're doing. But the rule is, if you're in tight third, we stick with the main character and can access their thoughts at any point. And a way I often like to think of it is think that the character is the one writing these pages or paragraphs. So although it has your voice, it should still be like, you can write it as if that person's perspective is influencing everything you say, and everything is being filtered through that character, even in third-person POV. So you can say stuff like, she walked up the steps to the ugliest-looking castle that ever existed. She had the worst dinner that anybody ever cooked. And like, those aren't facts, but our third-person narrator is saying them as if they are facts because it's infused with the voice of the character.
Yeah.
So something you should definitely do a lot of in your in tight third limited POV. Questions on anything else we talked about today? This is really all I had today. I wanted to look at where we were, fix the problems, and also make sure that we have a really clear path forward. So let me just ask, does anyone have any questions about anything we talked about or anything that they're going to be working on in their scene cards leading up to starting pages next week on November 5th?
I just want to say that this is like nerve-wracking because I feel like I made a goal and I have to meet it now, and it's been really hard. I've really been pushing myself to write, most days. And so I feel very nervous about this because, like, I can tell it's really affecting me too. Like, my skin I can tell in my skin when I'm stressed out. So I feel like stressed out. So
I'm sorry to hear you're
like,
stressed out. But you've already started the book though, right? So are you just nervous about not meeting the deadline, not like finishing in time?
yeah, like I feel so stressed out about if I'm not going to be able to do it. But I mean, I don't feel like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do it. It's just the journey of getting to the end like makes me really nervous.
It happens.
So
All
like,
writers have some version of this. Some anxiety about maybe it won't be good enough, or maybe I won't finish, or maybe just some kind of unnameable feeling that just fear or hesitance or something like that. It never really goes away entirely. The more you do it, the more you'll find how you personally can fight against that and cope with that. You also have a whole community here of people supporting and willing to help out and in any way that you need. And also these deadlines are all self-imposed. There's no actual deadlines unless you're on a contract from a publisher. Then there's no actual deadline to writing a book. So it's good to have these goals, but if you find that it's stressing you out, then you can always move your goal out, or you can maybe even just take off the deadline portion if that's just stressing you out too much, and just say, I'll try to meet it, but I'll finish when I finish.
I'm going to still try to do 2,400 words a day. That's a lot for me.
That's a lot for me. I only do 2,000. So it's a strong pace. Are you working on anything else at the same time, or just focusing 100% of energy on this?
I'm working on another book right now. It should be done any day now. But I've been working on that book for 3 years.
Oh, okay.
And
Wow.
I'm doing the screenplay on page 25 of the script. So I've cut back on work days. And the reason I'm trying to write 2,400 words a day is because the very next day, I might not be able to write the 1,200 words because I'll be too busy. So I'm doubling up to make sure I don't get behind. But like I said before, I'm going to finish the scene cards. That's the homework. Finish the full scene cards before I go forward. So even doing the scene cards is just really hard for some reason. I just feel really, I feel like once I set a goal, I have to meet it no matter what. And so it, like this self-imposed stress, pressure on myself to say, yes, you will do a novel and a script, at the same time and meet the deadline, because I just feel like I should be able to do it. So like now I'm putting pressure on myself to do it. And so
I don't
now,
know anyone who's capable of doing that. I should just say, like, that's a script. Like, we've never seen anyone able to complete more than one boot camp concurrently, like simultaneously. My recommendation would be just put everything else on pause except for the book. If it's stressing you out a lot, you don't have to be writing multiple things at once. Just writing 2,000 words a day is incredibly draining. And that with other writing projects on top of it, it's like all these deadlines are made up. You can just pause everything. There's no reason that it's going to damage anything by just pausing it. So I'd really recommend pausing everything but this.
I might consider that. I've been waking up really early some days, 3, 4 o'clock. I mean, not that I'm usually awake by 2 or 3, but it doesn't mean that I actually get out of bed and start doing stuff. I can't even see at that time. So it takes me almost an hour to fully wake up and then start doing what I got to do, And then sometimes I don't come on Discord or anything because I get like messages or emails or direct messages and then so I just kind of log out so I can, you know what I mean?
Sure.
So the quiet room is perfect, perfect thing to have so that you don't feel that stress of having to answer. But yeah, okay, thanks.
Sure.
Thank you.
I know for sure you'll get through it. You've finished many things before, so you'll finish this too. But I usually recommend just one thing at a time, especially if you're getting stressed out. Just pick one thing to focus all your energy on. Like, you're already doing like double the amount of work I think of anyone else here. At least you're doing double what I'm doing with a script and the 2,400 words per day. So you've taken on a massive amount, and there's no rule that says you can't just pause things strategically as needed. Thanks for that, Carmen. And if anyone else has suggestions or tips for it, then feel free to let us know as well. Anyone else? Any last thoughts before we call off for today? We'll be back at lab in 2 hours if you want to get more help with something.
I'll be there in lab. I
Okay.
should be there, most likely. So.
Sounds good. All right, we'll dismiss class for today then. Keep working on these scene cards. Try to finish them entirely by next week and get ready to start pages. It's going to be super fun.